Chapter 3. Choose Your Weapon. The advent of computers and cell phones has created a wild west of communication options, all fast and convenient, and the future is likely to bring even more. But although these communication options are all quick and easy, they're not all created equal. Some are better suited for personal communication, others for business. Some create a permanent record of communication that's easily accessed, others are more ephemeral. Before you send a text or an email or post on a social media website or make a phone call or even speak to someone face-to-face, you'd be wise to spend a minute thinking about whether you're choosing the right medium to convey your message. To write or not to write. The first decision you need to make when you want to communicate with someone is whether you should write at all. Writing may seem like a convenient option, but sometimes a phone call or a face-to-face conversation is really a better choice. Why might you prefer to talk rather than to write? There are a few reasons. One important consideration is that emails and text messages are far more likely to be misunderstood than spoken communication. Tone of voice and facial expressions are simply not available in writing, and smileys are useful only in the most basic of situations. During a face-to-face conversation or even over the phone, either party can ask for clarification or stop and rephrase what they're saying, so it's easy to nip any potential misunderstandings in the bud. Written communication doesn't allow the real-time give and take of a conversation. The fact that we're usually in a hurry when we're emailing or texting doesn't improve the clarity of our writing. Another important issue to consider is that any written communication creates a record. In most cases, this presents no problem. However, if your topic is at all personal or sensitive, you might want to think twice before you put your thoughts in writing. We'll talk more about the permanent and public nature of e-writing and the associated risks below. For now, ask yourself if you're comfortable having a written record of your message floating around for others to see. If the answer is no, you're better off using the phone or having a conversation face-to-face. Courtesy is another reason you might want to speak to someone rather than write to them. If you have something especially difficult or complicated to convey, it's tempting to take shelter in the written word instead of starting a potentially uncomfortable conversation. But there are some kinds of communication that you really should handle face-to-face, or at the very least over the phone. Important conversations about personal relationships should be done in person. Apologies often mean more when you say, "I'm sorry," while looking the person in the eye. Has anyone ever broken up with you via a text message? It's not nice, to say the least. It may feel easier for you to put difficult communications in writing, but trying to sort out problems in writing can actually be more difficult than doing it in person. What's more, the person on the other end will know that you're trying to avoid facing her, and that, in itself, can make a bad situation worse. Stop and think for a moment before you compose that email or text message. Are you hiding behind your writing so you don't have to face the person you're writing to? If so, consider whether an in-person meeting, or at least a phone call, might be the better choice for the message and for the relationship. Another way we hide behind our writing is through the email tag we sometimes engage in at work. Have you ever felt in such a rush that you've fired off an email simply to get a particular issue out of your inbox and into someone else's? When you do this, you may look like you're being productive, but are you really moving things closer to resolution? Usually not. If you have an ongoing round of email communication that's getting you no closer to resolving the issue at hand, you might be better off picking up the phone and sorting it all out. If you need a written record of the decisions you made on the phone, you can follow up with an email confirmation. But sometimes it's just more sensible to work things out through a conversation, rather than sending a seemingly endless string of written messages. 99 times out of 100, you can successfully make the decision about talking versus writing if you follow these 2 simple steps. Number 1, slow down, and Number 2, think. As you think, ask yourself if writing would be the best way to resolve what you're trying to resolve. Ask yourself how you would feel if you were the person on the other end of the communication, and whether you would rather do it in writing or by speaking personally. Most of the time, the decision is really a matter of common sense and common courtesy. Exercise both, and you'll find the best way. If you write. Once you've given yourself the green light to communicate in writing, you'll want to make sure the medium you choose is convenient for your reader and appropriate for your message. I once had a colleague who responded to all my emails by immediately sending me an instant message, IM. It didn't matter how pressing the issue was or how complicated. He was sitting at his desk, he liked instant messaging, and that's the way he wanted to communicate. In fact, I once overheard him telling another colleague about how efficient he was using instant messaging to get things done right away rather than leaving issues languishing in his email inbox. What he was overlooking, of course, was that it might not be convenient for others to respond to his IMs right away. Very often people choose to send an email because it gives both parties the time to think and respond at their own convenience. You can conduct an email conversation very efficiently during the little spaces between other activities during your day, or even continue the discussion at 3 o'clock in the morning if you so choose. By moving the discussion to instant messaging, my colleague changed the terms of the communication and, perhaps unconsciously, imposed his own schedule on mine. Even if we're not as fanatical and irritating as my former colleague, most of us have a preferred method of communication and will tend to default to it. Some people email, some people text, some people prefer the phone. There's nothing wrong with having a preference, of course, but if you really want to communicate effectively, you need to consider whether your preferred method of communication is convenient for your reader. It may be easy for you to send a lot of messages through Facebook, but if your friends aren't checking their messages there, you won't be heard. You might like texting, but if your friend has his phone off while he's at his desk, you're not going to reach him. If it's important for you to get in touch, you may have to be flexible about the medium you use to contact people. You'll also need to ensure that the medium you choose is appropriate for your message. How can you tell? There are a few parameters for you to consider: length, complexity, formality, number of readers, and permanency. Looking at these parameters in combination and in terms of what you want to say can help you decide the most appropriate form of e-communication for your message. Let's take a look at some e-communication options with these parameters in mind. Instant messaging is ideal for short, simple communications, like informal chats with friends. It can also be a very useful way to ask and answer quick questions at work. Instant messaging works best when your message is brief and uncomplicated, and when the message is directed to a small number of readers. A conversation that involves more than 3 or 4 people can be confusing. Separate cross-conversations spring up, answers get separated from questions, and it can be hard to trace the thread of your own discussion. Because the instant messaging conversation typically disappears when you close the window or shut down your computer, instant messaging is not a good choice if you need a permanent record of the communication. Although IMs can be cached, they're not easy for the average user to recover. If you're conveying information that people will need to refer to later, for instance giving instructions or finalizing an action plan, you're better off texting or emailing. Texting is great for quick informal messages, like making or confirming plans. It's easily accessed when you're on the go, and it's especially good for last-minute changes and updates. If your message is brief, uncomplicated, and informal, texting is a good medium for it. It's worthwhile taking a minute to assemble your thoughts before you send a text. If you forget something and need to send a follow-up text before your reader has replied, there's a chance that they will never see the original message, depending on the kind of phone they're using. Speed isn't always your friend. Like instant messaging, texting is more effective when there aren't a lot of people involved and when the topic is not complex. A friend of mine tells this story about a frustrating experience in communicating via text message. I was trying to arrange a meeting with two friends who didn't know one another and were both the non-emailing types. Every change in plans that one of them wanted, and they wanted quite a few, had to be filtered through me. I found myself texting these detailed messages back and forth until they finally came to an agreement. By the time we met, they were both fine, but I was feeling both anxious and put upon. As my friend's situation illustrates, it's not unusual for a text message communication to grow into something too complex for the medium to handle. If you find yourself at this point, you might just want to pick up the phone. If you still prefer to communicate in writing, though, you should consider sending an email instead of a text. Email is a long-established, flexible, and widely accepted form of e-communication. It's a staple of the business world and a part of people's personal lives. Email is generally easily accessible to most of us. It's sitting there on our work and home computers, and mobile devices make it easy to check email many times a day. Email can accommodate long and complex messages, though, as we'll see in the next chapter, your chances of being read are greater when you keep your emails as brief as possible. It's appropriate for informal discussions between friends and also for formal business communications. Email is a good way to get a message across to a large number of readers. It's also a good way to share information that everyone will need to access again. Email creates a permanent record that everyone on the thread can find easily. Although email is usually an excellent default choice for e-communication, remember this caveat. Don't make the decision without first considering your readers and their preferences. There are still people who don't get email on their mobile devices, and there are others who have abandoned email in favor of texting. If you really want to be heard, you'll need to select a medium that reaches your reader. Posting on social media sites like Facebook or Twitter is another way to get your message out. Most of these sites have a word or character limit for posts, so they force you to stick with brief messages. If you're sure that your target readers are looking at these sites frequently or following you, this can be an excellent way to reach large numbers of readers. Bear in mind, though, that the attention span of the average reader on social media sites is very short. If you have a complex message to convey, this might not be your best option. Social media sites are ideal for announcements, less ideal for complex messages that require thoughtful consideration. An even more serious concern about social media sites is the public nature of these postings. Anything you post on a website is public and permanent, so be sure you're comfortable with those two conditions before you post. Be warned that even if you reconsider and take down your post, you can't assume that it's gone. It's been seen by your audience and possibly shared with others, and as we'll see in the next chapter, most forms of e-writing are cached somewhere. If you wouldn't write your message on a sign and hang it out your bedroom window, don't post it on any website. What about the future? The world of e-communication is always in flux. New devices and forums become available, and their popularity changes over time. Websites come and go. Mobile devices become more sophisticated. Although it feels to some of us that the Internet has been around forever, the fact is that we're still in the very early days of electronic communication, and there are doubtless many changes to come. Whatever changes in the future, though, you can be confident in your e-communication if you follow the guidelines set out in this chapter. No matter how things change, your selection of the best medium for communication will still be guided by considering what's convenient for your reader and what's appropriate for your message. As in the past, early adopters of new technology will always run the risk that those they wish to communicate with aren't yet using the new technology. In such a case, early adopters need to be flexible in their communication choices. On the other hand, those who cling to outdated forms of communication and things get outdated faster and faster, it seems, also risk not connecting with their readers. These writers will also need to be flexible and willing to keep up with the times. No matter how things change, showing a mutual concern for the convenience of others will improve our success in communication. Whatever new devices and forums for e-writing come along, the same parameters for determining appropriateness will still be important to consider. Length, complexity, formality, number of readers, and permanency. Bear these in mind, and you're well equipped to make the appropriate choices for all your e-communications in the future. Keeping your kids safe in the world of e-communication. Kids grow up surrounded by all kinds of electronic communication, but even though it's omnipresent, it's not always benign. These two important guidelines can help students stay out of trouble in the world of e-communications. Assume everyone can see it. There's no such thing as privacy in e-communication. Facebook status updates are not just seen by your friends, but also by your friends' friends, and anyone can grab your words or your pictures and share them with the world. The same goes for anything you post on Twitter, discussion boards, and other websites. Your text messages can be forwarded. You'll be safer if you assume that anyone, including everyone in your school, even college admissions officers, can see everything you write on your computer or your mobile device. You can't take it back. Everything you post on the web or write on a smartphone is permanent. Deleted Facebook accounts remain accessible for an undetermined time after deletion, and deleted tweets continue to show up in search results long after you take them down. If someone wants to find something you wrote, they will. Never post or text anything that you don't want sticking around forever.